Okay, we're going to talk about the Lewis and Clark expedition that took about 2 years and 4 months. We talked about how Thomas Jefferson gained the Louisiana Territory and that he sends Lewis and Clark on an expedition to find out more about this region. If we take a look at this map, you're going to see that at the start of the 19th century, the newly independent United States consisted of the original 13 colonies over here, plus most of the former British land claims east of the Mississippi River, which is all over here, east of the Mississippi River. France claimed a large expanse of the land in the middle of the continent, right here, which later becomes Louisiana Territory. In 1763, France ceded the land to their ally Spain as part of the treaty ending the 7 Years' War with Britain. Louisiana included the Mississippi and Missouri rivers. Mississippi is here, and Missouri goes out west this way, which became more and more important as trade in the West grew. It also included the port of New Orleans, a huge commercial center at the mouth of the Mississippi. The mouth is down here where it empties out into the Gulf of Mexico. Through a treaty with Spain in 1795, the United States was allowed to export goods through New Orleans and to navigate the rest of the Mississippi. However, in 1798, Spain revoked the treaty, upsetting American merchants. In 1800, Napoleon Bonaparte took Louisiana back from Spain, so this now belongs to the French under Napoleon. Next year, Jefferson sent diplomats to Paris to negotiate the purchase of New Orleans and the surrounding areas in order to secure American control of trade on the Mississippi. Though Napoleon had reclaimed Louisiana in the hopes of establishing a French empire in North America, he soon abandoned those plans as France failed to defeat the Haitian Revolution and war with Britain continued. We talked about that with the Louisiana Purchase, that his dreams of having all of this land in conjunction with Haiti down here in the Caribbean didn't really make sense once he lost Haiti, and Haiti was that economically important spot for him because of the growth of sugarcane. So the American diplomats were authorized to pay up to $10 million for New Orleans and the surrounding area. They were shocked when the French offered the enormously larger territory of Louisiana for $15 million. Convinced that the United States would approve, the American representatives accepted the offer on April 30th, 1803. Though there were some doubts over the constitutionality of the deal, Congress quickly ratified the treaty. We mentioned how Jefferson wasn't really sure that he was allowed to do this, but they did it anyway. But even though on paper Louisiana belonged to the United States, Americans had no established command and little knowledge of the purchased land. President Jackson is going to order an expedition of 30 U.S. Army volunteers led by his side Meriwether Lewis and soldier William Clark to explore the territory. The objectives of the expedition included exploring resources and mapping the territory, finding a route across the continent for commerce or trade, establishing an American presence to preempt European powers from claiming it. So once you kind of live in that land, it's harder for people to take it back over. Establishing trade with Native American tribes, because Native Americans had lived there already, and emphasizing the United States sovereignty to Native Americans, showing that they have the authority to do this. The expedition lasted from May 1804 to September 1806. They departed from St. Louis and reached the Pacific coast. So they went from St. Louis right here, which you guys learned on your map activity, and went all the way out here to the Pacific coast. This is the Pacific Ocean, and then they turn around and come back all the way through. While the members of Lewis and Clark's expedition were the first Americans to see the western half of the continent, dozens of Native Americans had already lived in the region for millennia. While there were possibly millions of indigenous people living in the present-day American West before European contact, by 1800 the population was reduced to hundreds of thousands, mostly by diseases brought by Europeans. Lewis and Clark's team came into contact with nearly 50 Native American tribes during their expedition. These nations had very diverse societies and cultures. Some of these tribes had been in contact with English and French traders for decades before Lewis and Clark arrived. Others may not have seen white or black people before the Corps of Discovery, but had indirectly been in contact with the relative newcomers through trade, the introduction of horses, and of course, disease. So what we're going to focus on is this question. We're going to look at a couple of documents that are either going to support this question or not support this question, which is, were Lewis and Clark respectful to the Native Americans they met on their journey? We're going to read like a letter and a diary entry, and I think it's a textbook excerpt, or it's from Time Magazine, actually, and it's talking about the account itself, about Lewis and Clark's travels and what they encountered. So we'll see some primary source documents, the documents that were written by Lewis and Clark as their diary entries, and then a secondary source, the Time Magazine thing that describes the account, like a textbook would. So we're going to keep this question in mind as we move into the activity, that we are looking at whether they were respectful to the Native Americans or not.